I thought this would be the happiest day of my daughter's life and mine. Instead, it became the day my motherhood was torn apart before strangers. The morning began with sunlight filtering through my bedroom curtains, a golden warmth that seemed to promise good things. I lay there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, my heart fluttering in anticipation. Today was the day of Emily's baby shower, my Emily, my only child, my miracle. For 30 years, she had been my reason for waking up each day, the anchor in a life that had often felt storm-tossed and lonely. Today was supposed to be the day I could celebrate her, honor her, and show her in front of everyone just how deeply she was loved. I moved through the kitchen with a hum on my lips, brewing coffee as I mentally reviewed the preparations. I had spent weeks obsessing over every detail. There were pink and blue balloons floating in gentle clusters, because Emily had insisted she wanted the gender to be a surprise. I had tied ribbons around glass jars filled with candy, placed soft pastel streamers across the walls, and ordered a cake so exquisite I had nearly cried when I picked it up. A 3-tier masterpiece, with tiny fondant baby shoes perched on top like a symbol of the joy that was soon to arrive. I had planned every corner of the living room as though it were a canvas. Each plate, napkin, and flower arrangement was chosen not just for decoration, but for meaning. I wanted Emily to feel enveloped in love, to see tangible proof of how cherished she was. For me, it was more than a party. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice, of the battles I had fought as a single mother trying to raise her in a world that never made things easy. My journey hadn't been smooth. Emily's father had walked out when she was barely a toddler, chasing another life, another woman, another version of himself that didn't include responsibility. I had been left with bills I couldn't pay and a heart that wouldn't stop breaking. There were nights I went to bed hungry so that Emily could eat. Mornings I rode 2 buses to get to my receptionist job, praying that the babysitter wouldn't cancel again. There were holidays when the gifts were small but wrapped in hope. Birthdays where the cake was homemade because store-bought was too expensive. But through it all, Emma
were impeccable, their manners polished, but their words were often edged with subtle cruelty. They never said anything outright, nothing you could call them out on directly, but their looks and half-smiles spoke volumes. To them, I was small town, working class, a woman who had clawed her way through life with nothing but grit and stubbornness. I was tolerated, never embraced. Still, today wasn't about them. It was about Emily, her baby, and the joy of new beginnings. I reminded myself of that as I set the final touches in place, smoothing the tablecloth and straightening the plates. My relatives began arriving first, filling the house with chatter and warmth. Emily's friends followed, arms full of gifts wrapped in cheerful paper. Laughter bounced off the walls, and for a moment, I believed everything would be perfect. Then Emily arrived. She stepped into the room glowing, her hands resting protectively on her round belly. Her eyes sparkled as she took in the decorations, and when she turned to me, her smile was so radiant that my heart nearly burst. "Mom," she whispered, hugging me tightly, "this is beautiful." That alone made every sleepless night worth it. But trailing behind her was Jason, tall and stiff, his expression unreadable. He kissed her cheek quickly, but barely acknowledged me. His eyes darted to his phone within seconds, as if the screen held more interest than the celebration of his own child. Behind him came Linda and Robert, moving as if they owned the air around them. Linda's perfume arrived before she did, heavy and cloying, and her sharp eyes swept across the room with a smile that seemed more like an inspection than appreciation. Robert followed, his handshake firm but cold, his gaze skimming the decorations as though tallying their worth. "Hello, Maggie," Linda said smoothly, her lips curving in what might have passed for warmth if not for the glint in her eyes. "Oh, how quaint." Her voice carried just enough edge to sting, but I forced a smile and guided them toward the refreshment table. I told myself to let it slide, to not let them ruin the day. Emily deserved a mother who rose above it. The afternoon unfolded in waves of laughter, games, and gift opening. My relatives and Emily's friends clapped and cooed over tiny clothes and stuffed animals, their joy genuine and infectious. Then it happened. I was near the kitchen doorway, refilling a pitcher of lemonade, when I heard Linda's voice. Low, clipped, but clear enough. She's trying so hard, isn't she? Almost like a child putting on a play. The words sliced through me before I could stop them. My hand trembled on the pitcher, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. For a moment, I thought maybe I had misheard. Maybe she was talking about someone else. But then came Robert's chuckle, deep and dismissive. At least it's cleaner than Thanksgiving, he murmured. Remember that disaster? Their laughter was quiet, but unmistakable. The kind that people share when they think they're clever, when they know they won't be challenged. I froze, the sting of humiliation spreading through me like wildfire. My heart thudded in my chest, my throat tightening as if their words had wrapped around my voice and silenced it. I wanted to storm over, to defend myself, to demand they explain what was so funny, but I couldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. This was Emily's day, not a battlefield. So, I stood there, invisible, listening to them mock the effort I had poured my soul into. I forced myself to keep moving, to carry the lemonade back into the room and plaster on a smile. No one else seemed to notice the undercurrent of cruelty simmering in that corner. The rest of the guests were lost in their joy, oblivious to the dagger aimed at me. But I felt it. Every laugh, every whispered remark was another twist. I tried to breathe, tried to remind myself that I had endured far worse humiliations in my life. But this was different. This wasn't just about me. This was about my daughter, about the celebration I had built for her, about the love I had tried to show her in every streamer and balloon. And somehow, it had turned into a stage where I was the joke. And then the laughter started, and I realized it wasn't with me. It was at me. At first, I thought they were just joking, but jokes cut deepest when they're knives wrapped in laughter. The sound of laughter carries differently when you know you are the subject. It comes in little packets that burst just as you pass, the syllables splashing against the back of your neck, leaving you damp with self-consciousness. As I moved through my lips, too tender, because the day meant so much to me, I told myself to focus on Emily, on the pink and blue balloons nodding gently as if agreeing that love was all that mattered. But love has a way of falling quiet when ridicule walks into the room in polished heels and a pressed suit, pretending it doesn't smell like smoke while it holds the lit match behind its back. I kept busy. Busy kept me from crying. Busy meant cutting the cake precisely, lifting perfect slices with a silver server and setting them onto plates with little gold rims I had borrowed from my neighbor, because I wanted the celebration to feel special. Busy meant organizing the gifts by shape, tucking the smallest ones into a neat row so Emily could reach them easily, telling her stories about how she kicked at music when she was still inside me, how she always quieted if I hummed the same lullaby my mother had sung. For a few minutes, I watched Emily's face soften and her eyes go glassy the way they do when a memory brushes the edges of the present, and I let myself believe that I was safe inside the warmth of that. But then the room shifted again, and the low hum of gossip found its way to my ears like smoke searching a crack beneath a door. 2 guests, women I recognized from Jason and Emily's church group, stood beside the punch bowl, their voices pitched in that conspiratorial half-whisper calculated to travel just far enough. "It's a lot," one said, not unkindly but with a primness I recognized. The color choices, the ribbons. It's like she's trying to make up for, you know. She let the last word dangle, invitation masquerading as discretion. Her companion lifted a brow, the international sign for "tell me more while we pretend not to be this kind of person." "For being on her own," the first woman continued, exhaling as if a burden had been named. "For not having the kind of guidance most of us had. It makes sense she'd overdo it now. There's a certain desperation." She smiled into her cup, a small curved blade of a smile, and took a sip. I swallowed, tasting metal. Desperation. The word teenagers sling at the girl who doesn't know she's shining. Desperation. The label they paste on any mother who didn't get to set her life on cruise control.
I set down the tray and moved to the other side of the room so my hands wouldn't shake sentences with agreeable murmurs, as if everything that fell from her lips were pearls he got to count. I was close enough now to hear Linda clearly. She was too well-bred for cruelty in its raw form, but the refinements had been sharpened so many times they were more dangerous. "Children remember what they see," she said to a neighbor of mine, a woman who looked pleased to be included. "Habits are inherited. Stability is taught. That's why we put so much thought into how Jason was raised. We never wanted him to feel less than. It's a tragedy when a child has to grow up too fast." She delivered the line softly, with a little thoughtful furrow in her brow, and I could see people nodding as if she were confiding something compassionate, rather than cutting me at the Achilles. She glanced toward me, just for a heartbeat, then returned her gaze to the people at her feet. "I suppose Maggie did what she could," she added, the way a woman might say the weather tried its best not to ruin the garden party. Considering what? Considering the nights I counted grocery money down to the penny? Considering the mornings I walked Emily to the bus in the rain because the umbrella had broken and I didn't want her to be cold? Considering that I worked a receptionist job where my smile was part of my pay and the only spin class I could afford was the washing machine cycle at the laundromat, when I pressed my back against it and pretended the shaking meant progress? Considering the fact that I loved my child with a fierceness that made me brave enough to be foolish, generous enough to be hungry, loud enough to embarrass the quiet people who sign their checks with a flourish? Robert chuckled in that friendly way men have when they think a woman's cutting remark is something everyone can bond over if they round off the angles. He leaned in, elbows on his knees, hands clasped as if about to tell a campfire story. "Jason turned out just fine," he said, with a twinkle that made me want to throw the cake plate at the wall. "We always say we raised him with structure. Not everyone values that. Some people think kids are more resilient than they really are." He looked at me, held my gaze a beat too long, then winked, like we were in on the joke together, like we were adults who could agree that my daughter's childhood was a little amusing, a little chaotic, a little something to smile about later over. Touched again. I waited for him to say something, anything, a mom even, or a let's just enjoy the party. Nothing. Silence is not neutral. Silence chooses a side and then pretends it's Switzerland. I felt it press against my ribs, a weight that made it harder to inhale. Emily was across the room opening gifts, sweetly reading each card aloud, thanking people individually with that careful kindness that has always lived in her like a second pulse. She did not hear the commentary threading behind her like a shadow. I wanted to keep it that way. I wanted to protect the golden bubble she was floating inside. So I did what mothers do. I smiled. I nodded when people met my eyes, as if I agreed with whatever conclusions they were drawing. I reached for the tiny trash bag I'd tucked near the coffee table and began collecting ribbons and wrapping paper with the practiced cheer of a woman who knows that if the room looks tidy, maybe the feelings will too. The act of tidying gave my hands something to do while my heart stood in the corner, bracing against the next wave. The next wave arrived like a whisper through teeth. 2 more guests stood near the mantel, where I'd placed the framed ultrasound photo beside a vase of pale roses. They spoke in that kind of small-town sweet that always startles me when I hear it from city people. "She did a lot on her own," one murmured, as if reading a plaque. "You have to hand it to her. But there's a difference between love and best practices." Her companion nodded, lips pursed, body angled toward Linda as if waiting for her cue. People like Linda run entire rooms without ever raising their voices. They conduct with the single lift of an eyebrow. It came, right on schedule. Linda leaned back, smoothed an invisible thread from her sleeve, and offered her verdict as gently as a surgeon might lay down a scalpel. "You can love a child and still fail her," she said. "You can be devoted and still not give her what she needs. Emotion is not a substitute for structure." She turned her head, and the pearls at her ear caught the light like a wink from someone else's god. "Luckily," she continued, "Emily has us who think money is the same as wisdom."
I laughed softly at a joke I hadn't heard, and then I asked if anyone wanted more cake. Robert, eager to keep things convivial, patted the cushion beside him as if inviting a puppy, and called to me across the conversation. "Maggie, you must sit for a minute," he said, with that hearty, faux democratic generosity rich men use to make themselves feel accessible. "You'll wear yourself out." We need the grandmother to be in good shape when the baby arrives. The circle chuckled appreciatively, and I took a step forward because refusal would look like a snub, and agreement would look like acceptance, and either way I could not win. I perched at the edge of the sofa, set my hands together in my lap to keep them from trembling, and tried to direct my gaze toward Emily opening a onesie that said "Hello World" in script so delicate it looked like a promise. Linda turned to me with a smile that could frost a window. "You must be so excited, and I imagine a little nervous. Grandparenting is different from parenting. It requires boundaries, knowing when to step back for the sake of the child's stability." Her tone was instructional, like a podcast hosted by a woman who never raises her voice because she never needs to. "Emily will need quiet, not excitement," she added, her eyes flicking to the helium balloons that bobbed like happy thoughts above our heads. "Babies are very sensitive to energy." "Emily will have exactly what she needs," I managed, keeping my voice even, tasting the iron of restraint in every word. "And so will the baby." My eyes slid to Jason, a reflex I regretted even as I did it. He didn't look up. He scrolled, the blue light painting a soft halo on his detached face. "I'm sure," Linda replied, softness sharpened to a point. "Of course, you and Emily have your own ways. We've just found that consistency and calm produce better outcomes." There were times, when Jason was little, that even his grandmother understood she had to limit her involvement for the sake of the household rhythm. Too much emotion can be destabilizing, especially when there's already a history.
Mother used to say, "It takes a village, but not all villages are good at basics like bedtime. Stop me if I'm overstepping, but structure is love too." Sometimes, people equate being fun with being good. These are the kinds of distinctions that matter when there's a new baby, yes? He smiled at me as if we were having a spirited debate on a morning show he was guest hosting. I looked at their perfect clothing, their untroubled faces, the way their posture never slumped because nothing heavy had ever needed to be carried by their bodies for very long. I thought about the nights I stayed up with Emily when her ear infection screamed through our thin-walled apartment, about the times she fell asleep on my chest to the whir of the box fan and the hush of my made-up lullabies because silence felt too empty to hold us. I thought about the textbooks I read on the bus so I could help with her homework, the PTA meetings where I wore my best blouse and kept my chin up when other mothers asked about her father, with that casual cruelty people mistake for curiosity. I thought about how Emily, without any coaching from anyone named Miller, had grown into a woman kind enough to thank a cashier by name, and brave enough to love even when love didn't know how to hold her properly. I felt abraded raw by the idea that all of that could be reduced to a punchline. The murmurs around the room built like a tide, drawing in the people who needed something to do with their hands besides holding paper plates. A cousin of mine shot me an apologetic look. A neighbor studied the tassels on a throw pillow with academic concentration. One of Emily's friends, sweet, earnest, stood in that paralyzed way you stand when you can't decide if intervening is helpful or meddling. And through it all, Jason's phone lit up and dimmed, a metronome nobody asked for. He could have said, "Mom, enough." He could have said, "Hey, Maggie put her heart into this." He could have done the smallest thing, the easiest thing, the thing that would have cost him $0 and 1 ounce of courage. He did nothing, and nothing is sometimes the loudest act of all. When I couldn't bear the heat rising in my cheeks any longer, I reached for the tray again, the one with the extra forks and folded napkins, and qualified. We've already discussed it with Dr. Proctor, actually. She smiled down at her cuticle like it had told a clever joke. I'll be there, of course.
It will help the staff to have someone who understands order. A small shifting movement passed through the room, a subtle turning of bodies toward the center where Emily sat, still smiling at tissue paper as if it were just tissue paper and not the thin veil over a wrecking ball. She hadn't quite heard, I realized. She was still safe. I took a breath, then another, preparing to step between the words and their destination. But before I could, Robert chimed in with that playful lilt he used whenever he wanted to sand down the edges of a thing without changing its shape at all. Besides, he added, as if wrapping a bow on a package, there can't be too many people in there. It will be overwhelming for the baby. We wouldn't want the poor little thing to be handed around. All that excitement, all that volume. Best to keep it curated. He smiled at me as though he were offering me a thoughtful kindness, the way a maitre d' might offer a smaller table when he's already given your reservation to someone else. Something in my chest tightened to a pinch point. A small, hard kernel of pain wrapped inside composure. I set the tray down so I wouldn't drop it. In my head, I counted backwards from 10, which I had once learned from a parenting book you could borrow free from the library if you promised to bring it back without dog-earing the pages. But the numbers didn't slow anything. And beneath the pain, something else stirred. Curiosity, sharp and sudden, because Linda's comment had a shape to it that revealed planning, not an offhand slight. Discussed it with the doctor. The words curled inside me like a red thread leading into a dark hallway. I turned back toward them, managing a smile that made my cheeks ache. "Delivery rooms are busy," I said, keeping my voice gentle because sharpness would give them exactly what they wanted. "But the person who needs to be supported most is Emily. She'll decide who's with her." Linda's own smile widened just enough to be theatrical. "Of course," she purred. "We're all just here for Emily. Which is why we've made certain arrangements to ease that burden from her. Decisions can be hard when you're emotional. Fortunately, Jason has been proactive." She reached out at "Deliveries," she said, almost absent-mindedly, as though recalling a real estate detail. "Require the hospital to restrict visitors to immediate family based on bans. They only have so many bans to give. It's not personal, it's policy. We learned that when my sister had her second. So we've already indicated to the staff that the 2 bans should go to Jason and me. It will be better for everyone that way. Calmer." The word bans hung in the air like a particularly cruel ornament. For a second, I didn't understand, not because I was slow, but because the mind protects itself by refusing entry to certain meanings until it has no choice. Then the picture snapped into view. Wristbands. Those rubbery little circles that hospitals use to identify who belongs. Bands that limit access. Bands that name who is inside and who is outside. Bands that say yes and bands that say no. The room wasn't quiet, but in my head there was a hush so total it felt like absence. I saw Emily look up, her eyes moving across the space to where her mother-in-law was rearranging reality like a centerpiece on a table, and I watched the exact second my daughter's smile faltered. Jason did not meet her eyes. A few people murmured something about policy, about how hospitals know best, about how too many people can be overwhelming, about how grandmothers sometimes forget this isn't their baby. I heard the words, but they were like captions on someone else's film. My face remembered how to smile because I told it to, the way you might flex a muscle after a long period of stillness to make sure it still works. I felt the hot pressure of tears collecting and then retreating, unwilling to disgrace me in front of the audience Linda had curated. I would not cry. Crying would confirm every narrative she had stacked like a Jenga tower on the coffee table between us, waiting for me to pull one trembling block and send the whole structure down as proof I lacked the stability to be inside the room where my grandchild would take its first breath. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," I said, the words smooth and neutral, the good china of speech. Emily didn't agree to that. I looked to my daughter, and she looked at me with confusion blooming in her face. Confusion first, then something else gathering just behind it, something I knew too well. Fear. Her. Every time I had told her she could trust her instinct, that her voice mattered, that her future would be built on the foundation of her own choices. I thought about the crib we had built together last weekend, the way the Allen wrench dug into my palm, The way we had laughed when the last slat slid into place and she hugged me with relief because it felt more real. Because bringing a new person into the world is terrifying, and you cling to the people who make terror smaller. And now here, at the center of a room full of bows and bows on bows, someone was telling my daughter that her voice, the one I had fought to amplify for 30 years, was too emotional to manage 2 wristbands. I saw Emily's posture change, the small straightening, the hand drifting to her belly, the corners of her mouth sharpening. She was about to speak. And then from the cluster near the punch bowl, where whispers grow their legs, a woman I barely knew, maybe an acquaintance of Linda's or a colleague of Robert's, tilted her cup, let her voice carry just enough, and said the sentence that slid the day off its axis, that pulled the rug and the floorboards and the foundation beneath our feet all at once, the kind of sentence that comes wrapped in gift paper and opens to reveal a bruise. And then one of them said something that made my daughter freeze in her tracks. They didn't just mock me as a woman. They questioned if I was ever a mother at all. The sentence slid into the room as though it had been waiting there all along, crouched in the shadows of whispered gossip, waiting for the perfect moment to leap out and bare its teeth. I had thought the earlier remarks were cruel, but they were child's play compared to this. The woman's voice carried just enough volume to slice through the chatter, soft enough to sound like an accident, but deliberate enough that everyone heard. "Well," she said with a careful laugh, "some people even wonder if Emily is really Maggie's daughter at all." The air seemed to vanish from the room. For a split second, silence bloomed so thick I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The gasp that followed was sharp, like a collection of tiny glass shards falling onto the floor all at once. A few people laughed nervously, that awkward titter people use when they don't know whether to be motionless, too. She sat with a half-opened gift in her lap, pink tissue paper spilling over her knees, her eyes wide, but her lips pressed tightly together. She looked from me to Linda, then to Jason, then back to me, as if waiting for someone to shatter the unbearable silence. Her face carried that peculiar agony of being torn in 2 directions, daughter and wife, child and adult, loyalty and fear, an agony I knew too well because I had lived it in different forms for decades. And Linda didn't laugh, didn't gasp, didn't even shift uncomfortably the way a decent person might have. Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a little smirk that was barely perceptible but undeniable to me, the kind of smirk that belongs to someone who knows the fire is consuming the house but has already packed her own valuables safely away. She didn't need to say the words herself. She just let them hang there, suspended in the air like a poisonous mist, knowing they had done their work. In that suspended moment, my mind spun backward, carried against my will into the long corridor of memory. I saw the hospital room where Emily had been placed into my arms for the very first time, her tiny fingers curling reflexively against my skin. I remembered the raw exhaustion in my body, the tears that streamed down my face, the sacred promise I made in silence, that I would love her fiercely enough to fill every gap, that I would stand in the place of 2 parents if I had to, that I would fight every battle on her behalf, even if my body broke under the weight of it. I remembered the double shifts at the diner, the aching feet, the smell of grease clinging to my hair as I walked home under flickering streetlights, knowing that every dollar I saved meant Emily could have something more. Shoes that fit, a backpack with a zipper that worked, a chance at feeling normal in a world that kept reminding us we were different. I remembered carrying her, half asleep, from the babysitter's couch to our own apartment, whispering to her that one day she would understand. One day she would see that she was never lacking, that every sacrifice was a gift wrapped in love. I remembered the loneliness, too, the way other mothers paired off at school events, their husbands standing beside them while I stood alone, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee and pretending I didn't notice the way people's eyes slid over me like I was who I was. They were questioning if my motherhood was real at all. I blinked and the room came back into focus. People shifted in their seats, some looking at the floor, some staring openly, hungry for drama. Jason, my son-in-law, sat with his arms folded across his chest, his face unreadable, but his silence screamed louder than any words could have. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend Emily. He just sat there, stone-faced, letting the insinuation grow like a weed in the center of the room. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears, but she still didn't speak. She looked at me, then away, then back again, as though begging me silently to make this better, to tell her it was ridiculous, to reclaim the truth before it could harden into something else. But I couldn't find my voice. It was as if the weight of every year of sacrifice, every insult endured, every silent night of worry had collapsed onto me at once. I had thought humiliation was being mocked for a cake or a balloon. But humiliation is when someone strips you of your identity in front of everyone and leaves you standing naked in the middle of a crowd. I wasn't just a woman at that moment. I was a mother. And they were questioning whether I had the right to claim even that. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was devastating. Nervous giggles, embarrassed chuckles, the kind of laughter people use when they don't know how to handle cruelty, when they'd rather distance themselves by pretending it was all a joke. But to me, it was an orchestra of betrayal, every note striking deeper into the place inside me that had once been unbreakable. I forced a smile. It was brittle, trembling at the edges, but it was all I had left to shield myself with. I told myself not to cry, not here, not now, not in front of Emily. But inside, I felt as though someone had reached into my chest and ripped out 30 years of devotion, 30 years of love, 30 years of proof that I had been enough, and tossed it aside as though it were nothing but paper decorations destined for the trash. And in that silence, I heard whispers of something I was never supposed to know. The cruelest lies are the ones whispered just
dropped the plate I was holding. My stomach clenched, my ears roared, and for a moment, the decorations blurred into a dizzy mess of pinks and blues. Not really her daughter! I wanted to scream, to demand who dared to question something so sacred. But my voice betrayed me. I could only stand there, staring at the faces that wouldn't meet mine, as though guilt and curiosity had conspired to keep them all busy looking at the floor, or at Emily's swollen belly, or at the window where the balloons bumped gently against the glass. Jason sat in his chair, his phone abandoned for once, but his posture said everything. His jaw was tight, his leg restless, and yet he still said nothing. His silence was a wall between me and a wall I could not scale, no matter how desperately I wanted him to defend me. His mother's smirk, his father's chuckle, the whispers in the room, they had all planted the seed. And Jason, my daughter's husband, the man who should have been my ally, if not my friend, let it grow unchecked. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the tissue paper from her gift into neat squares. She looked at me, her eyes wide and glistening, as though trying to read my soul. For a moment, I thought she might dismiss it, might laugh it off as ridiculous. But then her lips parted, and in the softest, most fragile voice I had ever heard from her, she asked, "Mom, is there any truth to that?" It was as though the floor gave way beneath me. My daughter, the child I had carried, the baby I had nursed through fevers, the girl I had cheered for at school plays, the young woman I had hugged through heartbreak, was looking at me as if she wasn't sure she belonged to me at all. My chest constricted, my breath caught, and my vision blurred with tears that threatened to spill over. "No," I whispered, shaking my head fiercely, my words trembling as though they had to climb uphill to escape. "Emily, you are mine. You have always been mine. There is no truth in that. None." My voice cracked on the last word, the weight of betrayal pressing down so hard I thought it might break me in two. But doubt once whispered, "Bear every sacrifice of the past 3 decades rendered invisible in the face of one whispered lie." Did they not see the calluses on my hands from years of work? Did they not see the gray strands in my hair, each one earned from nights spent worrying over Emily's fevers, her exams, her choices, her tears? Did they not see that every inch of me was carved out of motherhood, that I had no identity outside of it, that to question my claim to Emily was to erase my very existence?
My mind raced through memories like a desperate slideshow. Emily's first day of kindergarten, her wide eyes clinging to me until the teacher gently pried her away. The way she used to curl against me during thunderstorms, whispering, "You'll keep me safe, won't you, Mommy?" The prom night when she descended the stairs in a pale blue dress, and I had to bite back tears because she looked so much like a dream I had prayed into existence. All of it was real. All of it was mine. And yet here I stood, my motherhood under scrutiny, my love questioned as though it were some elaborate performance. I forced myself to meet Emily's eyes again, to pour every ounce of truth I had into my voice. Emily, you are my daughter, not just in name, not just in memory, by blood, by heart, by everything that makes me who I am. Don't you ever doubt that. But even as I spoke, I saw the hesitation in her face, the shadow of the rumor casting itself across her trust. The cruelty of the moment wasn't just in the words spoken, but in the seed of doubt they planted in my daughter's heart. That doubt cut deeper than anything Linda or Robert could ever say, because it meant my love wasn't enough to shield her anymore. The whispers didn't stop. They grew, faint and overlapping, like 1,000 little knives being sharpened just beyond reach. I could hear them in fragments. She doesn't look much like her, does she? I always wondered about the father. It would explain so much. Each phrase landed like a blow, each one a reminder that a single doubt can rewrite 30 years of truth in the minds of people too eager to believe a scandal. I wanted to scream above it all, to shout until the walls themselves shook, to drag each person into the memories of scraped knees and birthday candles and bedtime stories. But the weight of shame pinned me in place, pressing me down until all I could do was stand silence. And the sound was so sharp against the hush of the room that every head. Standing there was a man in a crisp white coat, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression serious enough to cut through the streamers and balloons as though none of them mattered. For a heartbeat, I thought I had conjured him from my own panic, the way the body invents shadows when fear grows too large. But then he stepped forward, steady and deliberate, and the air in the room shifted again. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests leaned toward one another with nervous glances, hands fluttering to mouths, eyes wide with confusion. Doctors belonged in hospitals, not in living rooms decorated with pastel balloons and a cake waiting to be sliced. My chest clenched as my mind rushed to the most immediate terror. Emily, my baby, my only child. Was something wrong with her pregnancy? Had something happened that I didn't know about? Was this man here to deliver news no mother should ever hear? Emily stiffened, clutching her belly protectively, her lips parting in confusion. She whispered, her voice thin with fear. I reached for her instinctively, my hand trembling, desperate to reassure her even though my own panic was rising like a tide I couldn't hold back. Before I could ask anything, Linda's voice sliced through the tension like a knife wrapped in silk. She rose gracefully from her chair, her smile calm, her tone commanding. "Oh, good. You're here, Dr. Hayes. Perfect timing." She gestured to the man as if he were no stranger, as if this had all been part of the script she had written long before I had tied the first balloon. The room gasped as one, the realization dawning that this was no accident. Some guests leaned back in their seats, clutching their cups tighter, while others leaned forward, hungry for whatever drama was about to unfold. The cheerful chatter of a baby shower had transformed into the heavy air of a courtroom, and Linda, with her pearls gleaming against her collarbone, was clearly enjoying her role as prosecutor. "Why is there a doctor here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and rage. I stepped forward, placing myself slightly in front of Emily as if my body alone could shield her from whatever storm was about to break. "Emily doesn't need a doctor. She's fine. The baby's fine. They were ready to watch me unravel. Emily clutched the tissue paper still in her lap, her knuckles white, her eyes darting between the doctor and me. "Mom," she whispered again, this time more urgently. "What is happening? Why is he here?" Before I could answer, Linda stepped closer, her voice firm, her hand resting delicately on the back of Emily's chair, as though claiming possession. "If we're going to discuss family, let's have proof," she said sweetly. Her smile meant for the room rather than her daughter-in-law. "Rumors have a way of spreading, and I think it's only fair we all put them to rest once and for all." Her words hung in the air like smoke,
choking me. Proof? What proof? My life had been proof. My scars, my sacrifices, my endless devotion. What more proof did anyone need that Emily was mine? But Linda wasn't speaking of devotion. She was speaking of blood, of science, of cold facts written on paper that could be twisted into something cruel. Panic clawed at my chest. Is Emily sick? I asked the doctor sharply, desperate to change the course of the conversation. Is the baby sick? Because if that's why you're here, then say it now. My voice cracked, betraying the terror I couldn't contain. Dr. Hayes shook his head gently. No, neither Emily nor the baby are in danger, he said. Relief flooded me for the briefest moment, before his next words struck like a hammer. But I do have DNA results that concern this family. The room gasped again, louder this time, the sound of shock and delight colliding in the same breath. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," while another muttered, "I knew it." The whispers became a tide, swelling around me until I thought I might drown in them. Emily's face paled, her lips trembling as she stared at the doctor. DNA results? She repeated, her voice breaking. What are you talking about? Why would there be DNA results? I could hardly breathe. My hands shook as I reached out toward her, but she leaned slightly away, torn between me and the weight of the words hanging in the air. My heart broke in real time, shattering with every inch of distance growing between us. Jason finally looked up from his silence, his face tight, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but his eyes flicked toward his mother, then toward Dr. Hayes, as if confirming something I couldn't yet understand. His silence in midnight fevers and birthday candles and whispered prayers. And yet here I was, standing in a room full of people who seemed to believe otherwise. The doctor shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, clearly caught between duty and shame. His eyes softened when they met mine, but he pressed on. I was asked to run a test, he said carefully. A test comparing Emily's DNA to... He paused, his lips pressing together as if reluctant to finish. To Maggie Turner's. The room exploded with gasps, with murmurs, with the scraping of chairs as people shifted closer or further away. My knees nearly buckled beneath me, and I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. My name, my blood, my motherhood being questioned in front of everyone, as though it were a spectacle to be judged and debated. Emily's face crumpled, her tears finally spilling over as she turned to me. Mom, please tell me you didn't know about this. I didn't, I choked, my voice raw, my hands reaching toward her even as she recoiled. Emily, I swear to you, I never agreed to this. I never wanted this. You are mine. You've always been mine. But the doubt was already in her eyes, the whispers already taking root in the hearts of the guests who had once laughed and eaten cake in celebration. The balloons swayed gently above us, mocking in their cheerfulness, as though the room itself knew this wasn't a baby shower anymore. It was a trial. Dr. Hayes sighed softly, his expression heavy with the burden of his envelope. He lifted it slightly, the white paper stark against the pastel decorations. The results are here, he said, his voice low but carrying enough weight to silence the whispers in an instant. And they will answer the question once and for all. And then, with the whole room watching, he opened the envelope. The truth doesn't whisper. It explodes. The sound of the paper tearing echoed louder than it should have, like a gunshot inside the small living room. Every balloon, every streamer, every bow on the gifts seemed to tremble as Dr. Hayes slid a sheet from the envelope and unfolded it with deliberate care. The silence that followed was suffocating, a silence thick enough to press on my chest, to claw at my throat, to make me want to scream just to hear my own voice again. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the page between the DNA profiles of Maggie Turner and Emily Miller. The words landed like dynamite. A collective gasp swept across the room, followed by a low hum of shocked whispers that grew louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. Some guests covered their mouths, others exchanged knowing glances, and a few leaned back as though physically recoiling from the blast. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the table for support. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and hollow, as if my very identity had been ripped from my body and left exposed on the floor. A discrepancy. That word echoed in my skull like a curse, louder than the gasps, louder than the whispers, louder than the frantic beat of my heart. Emily sat frozen, her hands clutched around her belly as if bracing against an invisible storm. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide and shimmering with tears, torn between disbelief and the sharp sting of betrayal. I wanted to run to her, to gather her in my arms, to shout above the noise that nothing, no paper, no test, no cruel scheme, could erase the truth of 30 years of love. But I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the floor, my heart split open in front of everyone. Memories came rushing back. Memories I had buried so deep that pulling them out now felt like tearing stitches from an old wound. The hospital, the delivery room, the chaos of that night. I remembered the bright, sterile lights, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of Emily's first cries mingling with my own. I remembered the doctor's face, calm but concerned, telling me there had been complications. My blood pressure had spiked, my body trembling, my mind foggy from exhaustion and fear. I remembered the blur of nurses, the cold hands pressing against me, the panic that surged through me when they said they had to take her for observation. For hours, I hadn't seen my baby. For hours, I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling, begging God not to take her from me, clutching the thin blanket as if it were her tiny body. And then finally, they placed her in my arms, swaddled in pink, her eyes fluttering shut, her fingers curling around mine. The relief had been so profound I hadn't questioned a thing. Why would I? She was mine. She was the baby.
Judgment filling the room. Linda's voice rose above the whispers, calm and smooth, her tone carefully measured to sound concerned rather than triumphant. "This isn't about blame," she said, her eyes scanning the room to collect the sympathy she believed she deserved. "It's about clarity. Emily deserves to know the truth about where she comes from." Her words struck Emily like another blow. My daughter, turned her gaze back to me, searching my face for answers, for reassurance, for something that could erase the paper Dr. Hayes held in his hands. Her lips trembled as she finally spoke. "Mom, how can this be true? Did you know?" The question shattered me. The fact that she could even ask it, that doubt had been planted deeply enough to make her voice tremble with suspicion, was worse than anything Linda or Robert could have orchestrated. "Emily," I whispered, my eyes burning with tears, "I swear to you, I didn't know. I never—" My voice broke, and I pressed a hand against my chest as if trying to hold my heart together. "You are mine. You have always been mine." But even as I spoke, I could feel the atmosphere shifting. People avoided my eyes now, their sympathy diluted by suspicion. I was no longer the mother hosting her daughter's baby shower. I was the woman at the center of a scandal, the subject of whispered theories, the villain in a story someone else had written. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat again, his brow furrowed as he looked at the page in his hand. His hesitation was palpable, as though the words he held carried a weight he did not want to drop into the world. "These results," he began, his voice low and careful, "indicate that the DNA profiles do not match as expected. However," he paused, glancing at me, then at Emily, then at the room full of hungry eyes. The whispers hushed instantly, the crowd leaning in closer. My breath caught in my throat, my entire being trembling with dread. Emily's tears spilled freely now, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Then who am I? Who's my mother?" Her words sliced through me, deeper than any scalpel ever could. For 30 years, I had poured everything I was into being her mother, and in one cruel moment, the room was treating that devotion as everything else. The paper in his hand seemed to glow with a cruel light, a beacon of a truth I hadn't asked for, a truth that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew. And then he looked at Emily, his face solemn, his voice steady. But the truth inside that envelope wasn't what they expected. It was something far worse. Secrets buried in hospitals don't stay hidden forever. The silence stretched so taut it felt like the streamers would snap under its weight. Dr. Hayes gripped the paper with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly, his lips pressing together as if he was stalling for time, as if he dreaded being the vessel for the storm his words would unleash. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs, each thud a drum of fear. My mind dragged me backward again, unbidden,
into the dim corridors of memory. I was 29, lying on a gurney beneath fluorescent lights that burned holes into my eyelids. I remembered the sudden flood of alarms, the voices shouting for equipment, the cold rush of fear as my body refused to obey me. My blood pressure had plummeted, or spiked, I couldn't recall which, but the terror was the same. The pain was overwhelming, and then there was a strange floating sensation, as though I had left my body and was watching everything from above. Nurses moved swiftly, one whispering, "We may lose them both," as if I wasn't even there. Then the bright cry of a newborn pierced the air, followed by silence, followed by hurried footsteps as they carried her away from me. For hours I had nothing, no baby to hold, no reassurance, no certainty that I would ever see the child I had carried. My vision blurred, my body heavy with drugs and exhaustion. I begged for her, and finally she was placed in my arms. My Emily, her tiny fists clenched, her lips pursed in sleep, her weight a miracle against my chest. I never questioned, I never doubted. She was mine, and that was all that mattered. Now, in my living room, with Dr. Hayes standing in front of me, those memories clawed at me with new sharpness. Had something happened in those hours when I was too weak to know? Had there been a mistake, a swap, a secret decided without me? My head swam with the terror of it. Linda's voice cut into the moment, slicing through my fear with her carefully sharpened tone. "Well," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we can't ignore what was just read aloud." That cold, polished smile, as though my rage only proved her point. "Emotion isn't proof," she said simply, glancing toward the doctor with mock concern. "Science is." Dr. Hayes raised a hand, his face tightening with frustration. "Mrs. Miller, please," he said firmly. The weight of his authority silenced even Linda, though her smirk lingered. He turned back to the paper in his hand, inhaled deeply, and finally spoke the words that would either shatter me or save me. "These results confirm," he said, his voice steady now, "that Maggie Turner is indeed Emily Miller's biological mother." For a moment the room went utterly still. Then the silence broke like glass shattering on tile. Gasps, shocked exclamations, the sudden scrape of a chair leg. Relief coursed through me so fiercely that my knees almost gave out. Tears blurred my vision, and I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth as the truth washed over me like a tide. She was mine. My Emily was mine. But the relief was short-lived, because Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. His brow furrowed, his tone lowering, as if stepping into darker waters. "However," he continued, scanning the page again, "the results also revealed an anomaly, something that requires further explanation." A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. I gripped the back of a chair, my body rigid, as if bracing for another blow. Emily's wide eyes darted between me and the doctor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What anomaly?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a child's. Dr. Hayes hesitated. His eyes flicked to me, then to Linda, then back to the page. "There is no question that Maggie is Emily's mother," he said slowly, deliberately. "But the paternal markers show irregularities. The profile does not align with the expected biological father listed in the records." The words detonated in the room. Guests gasped louder this time, their whispers fevered, their faces shocked and gleaming with the thrill of scandal. My own breath caught in my chest. The expected father. Emily's father. The man who had abandoned us when she was still a toddler. What irregularities could there possibly be? My mind flashed back again. Those hospital whispers. Those hours of separation. The way I had been too weak to question anything. Had there been a mistake in paternity records? A cover-up? But then she straightened her shoulders, her smirk returning, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Convenient, isn't it?" she said coldly, her words slicing through the heavy air. "Maggie gets to claim motherhood while the rest of us are left with unanswered questions. I, for one, am not satisfied the room turned on her. Some guests glaring, others whispering furiously. But her words lingered, a toxin that refused to dissipate. Even as Dr. Hayes folded the paper, even as Emily's sobs filled the room, even as my heart swelled with relief that my daughter was mine, that toxic seed remained. The truth had confirmed what I already knew in my soul, that Emily was my child, but it had also unearthed something darker,
something buried in hospital records, something tied to a father who was no longer here to answer for himself. And though the room sat stunned into silence, I knew this wasn't the end, because one person in that room still refused to believe it. Nothing hurts like watching your child wonder if she belongs to you. Emily's sobs cut through the room like sirens, shattering whatever fragile silence had lingered after Dr. Hayes's revelation. She clutched at her stomach, tears running hot and fast down her cheeks, her body trembling as if the ground beneath her had been pulled away. Her voice cracked, high and raw, carrying all the pain of a child questioning her very roots. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom?" she cried, her words spilling out between gasps. "Why didn't you ever tell me about complications, about what happened that night? If you had just explained, maybe this wouldn't feel like a betrayal." Her anguish was a blade, and every syllable drove it deeper into my chest. I reached toward her, my hands shaking, desperate to close the distance between. "Emily," I whispered, choking on the weight of 30 years. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to carry that pain. I wanted you to believe your birth was a miracle, not a near tragedy. I wanted you to feel safe, not haunted by the memory of how close I came to losing you." I paused, my voice breaking, as I searched her eyes for even a flicker of understanding. I thought carried suspicion softened with sympathy. A few even glared at Linda as though realizing for the first time how carefully she had twisted everything to her advantage. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the truth would finally take root. But Robert Miller wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice booming, his face flushed with anger. "Don't let her fool you," he barked, pointing a rigid finger in my direction. "This woman has lied from the beginning. She's hiding something still. Complications, secrets, cover-ups. What else is she not telling us? A woman who hides one truth is capable of hiding a dozen more." The fragile sympathy in the room wavered. Murmurs rose again, doubt crawling back like smoke under a door. Robert's voice, loud and commanding, seemed to fill every corner, drowning out the softer truths that had begun to emerge. Emily's sobs quieted into hiccups, her face pale and stricken as she looked between us, her mother on one side, her father-in-law on the other, both pulling her in opposite directions. Her hands trembled, her breath shallow, her entire body caught in the cruel tug-of-war of suspicion and loyalty. I held her gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let her think for even a moment that I was ashamed. "Emily," I whispered, my voice steady despite the tears burning my eyes. "I have nothing left to hide. Ask me anything and I will tell you. But don't let them erase 30 years of love with one sheet of paper and their poisoned words. You know me. You know who held you through every fever, who cheered for you at every milestone, who never let go no matter how hard it got. That's who I am. That's who I've always been." The room went silent again, the air heavy with the weight of her choice. And that's when Emily finally turned against him. When truth tears through lies, families fracture. The air in the room shifted the moment Emily lifted her head, her eyes red from crying but fierce with a fire I hadn't seen in her since she was a little girl defending herself on the school playground. She rose unsteadily from her chair, her hands trembling as she wiped at her face, but her voice came out strong, slicing through the heavy silence like a blade. "Enough!" The word rang out, sharp and final, pulling every whisper to a halt. The room froze, every guest turning.
Linda's smile faltered for the first time, her composure slipping just slightly as she adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat. Robert opened his mouth to retort, but Emily held up her hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried more weight than any scream. "This isn't about you," she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "This isn't your baby shower. This isn't your life. You came here to tear my mother apart, but all you've done is prove how little you understand about love. She's been both my parents since I was a child. She's been my safe place, my anchor. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you don't belong here." The room erupted. Guests broke into factions, voices rising, arguments spilling into the air like a wildfire that couldn't be contained. Some defended me, their voices firm, reminding others of the sacrifices they'd seen me make. Others, loyal to the Millers, or too enthralled by scandal to let it go, sided with Robert, insisting that unanswered questions still hung over the night of Emily's birth. The chatter rose and fell in waves, accusations, defenses, voices trembling with passion or anger. Jason sat at the edge of it all, his head in his hands, his phone abandoned on the table. He didn't speak, didn't intervene, didn't even look up. His silence was louder than the shouts, his inaction a gaping wound in the center of the room. Emily's eyes flicked toward him once, and the disappointment that crossed her face was almost unbearable. She was fighting for me, for us, and her husband couldn't even lift his head. I stepped forward, my hands raised, my voice trembling with urgency. Please, please, everyone, stop. This isn't what today was meant to be. This was supposed to be a celebration of life, of family, of love. All of this shouting, all of this tearing each other apart, it's not what Emily or this baby needs. My words barely carried over the din, but a few people quieted, their faces softening as they saw the desperation in mine. But others grew louder, the room splitting into factions that no longer resembled a gathering of loved ones, but a battlefield. Arguments overlapped until it was impossible to tell who was shouting what. The decorations that once glowed with joy now hung limp and sad, caught in the storm of voices. The cake sat untouched, its pastel frosting a cruel reminder of what the day had been meant to symbolize. I turned back to Emily. Shouting reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices colliding in the small space. Emily swayed slightly, her face pale, her lips parting as if to speak. And then, Emily suddenly collapsed. The room of laughter became a room of screams. It happened so fast that my mind struggled to keep up. One moment, Emily was standing tall, her voice steady as she defended me against the storm of accusations. And the next, she was crumpling to the floor, her body folding in on itself like a marionette with cut strings. For a heartbeat, there was silence, a stunned stillness where no one moved, no one breathed. Then the screams tore through the air. "Emily!" I cried, my voice raw, shoving past chairs and arms to get to her side. Her face was pale, her lips colorless, her eyes fluttering open and closed as if she were struggling to stay tethered to the world. My hands trembled as I touched her cheek, then moved to her stomach, my mind spiraling in panic. The baby, my grandchild, my daughter, my everything. The crowd surged forward in chaos, voices overlapping in panicked confusion. "Call 911!" someone screamed. "Get her some water!" another shouted uselessly. The once festive decorations now seemed grotesque, mocking us with their cheerful colors as the reality of crisis took over. Dr. Hayes moved faster than anyone else, kneeling beside Emily with clinical precision. His calm voice cut through the panic, authoritative and steady. "Everyone step back. She needs air." His hands moved quickly, checking her pulse, his brow furrowed with concentration. "She's fainted, but her vitals are weak. Call an ambulance. Now." A cousin fumbled with her phone, dialing frantically, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. I clutched Emily's hand, my tears spilling onto her skin as I whispered. In that moment, the room blurred around me. The chaos receded, and I was no longer in my living room. I was back in that small apartment years ago, crouched beside Emily's tiny bed as she burned with fever, her small body trembling beneath damp sheets. I remembered the way her cough rattled her chest, the way tears spilled down his cheeks, his body shaking as he clutched her as though holding her tightly enough might tether her to life. For a moment, I wanted to hate him. For every silence, for every refusal to defend me, for every time he chose passivity over courage. But in that instant, I saw the truth. He did love her. His fear was real, his anguish genuine. He was as terrified as I was, and for the first time that night, the facade cracked. The sound of sirens grew faint in the distance, the promise of help approaching. Guests moved restlessly, some crying, some praying, others frozen in helpless shock. Linda stood rigid near the corner, her face pale but her lips pressed tightly together, as if refusing to let fear mar her composure. Robert hovered at her side, his bluster gone, replaced by a stiffness that looked more like fear than denial. Dr. Hayes stayed steady, his voice calm but urgent as he guided us through the minutes that felt like hours. "Keep her head elevated. Don't crowd her. She needs oxygen."
His hand remained on her wrist, checking her pulse again and again, his jaw tight as though he were holding back the full weight of what he knew. I bent close, my forehead pressing against Emily's. "You've always been strong," I whispered through tears. "You fought your way into this world once. You can fight again. For you, for your baby, for me." Jason echoed me, his words spilling out in desperate sobs. "Emily, please, don't leave me. Don't leave us. I can't do this without you." His grief was unguarded, raw, undeniable, and for the first time that night, he was not Linda's son or Robert's heir. He was just a husband, terrified of losing his wife. The paramedics burst into the room, their uniforms and equipment slicing through the chaos with practiced efficiency. They surrounded Emily, lifting her gently, their voices low and precise as they worked. The guests moved back, some crying openly, others whispering frantically about what was happening, their earlier gossip silenced by the immediacy of real fear. As they carried Emily out on the stretcher, Jason clung to her hand, refusing to let go until he was forced aside so they could maneuver her through the doorway. He stumbled after them, wild-eyed and trembling, shouting her name as if she might slip away if he stopped saying it. I followed close behind. "Follow us to the hospital." The door slammed shut, the sirens blaring as the ambulance sped off into the night. I stood frozen in the street, the cold air biting against my tear-streaked face, the lights disappearing into the distance with my daughter inside. Guests spilled out behind me, their voices hushed now, stripped of malice and gossip, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Linda and Robert stood apart, their expressions unreadable, their carefully crafted masks cracking at the edges. My legs shook beneath me, and I clutched at the side of my car for balance. All I could think was that I had failed, that despite all my promises, all my sacrifices, I was once again powerless to protect Emily when she needed me most. And yet, deep in my chest, beneath the fear and the grief, a darker dread took root. Because as terrifying as Emily's collapse had been, something in Dr. Hayes' expression told me this wasn't just about fainting or stress or pregnancy complications. He had seen something in her vitals, something in her condition that made his jaw tighten, his eyes avoid mine. And I knew, with a cold certainty that made my stomach churn, that whatever awaited us at the hospital would not simply be medical answers. It would be truth, and truth was often far crueler than lies. But what they discovered at the hospital was even more shocking. Sometimes the truth comes not from words, but from blood. The antiseptic sting of the hospital hit me the moment I stepped through the doors, the fluorescent lights glaring down like interrogators. I could barely breathe, my legs trembling beneath me as I hurried behind the nurses wheeling Emily toward the maternity wing. My baby, my Emily, lay pale but conscious on the stretcher, her hand weakly gripping the side rail as though she needed the metal frame to anchor her to this world. Jason shuffled beside her, his face blotched from crying, his fingers twitching as if they didn't know what to do without her hand in them. For hours he had been silent, passive, but now he was unraveling, muttering prayers, pressing his palms together like a boy afraid of being punished. For the first time in years, I almost pitied him. They swept Emily into a curtained room, monitors beeping to life as nurses clipped sensors to her chest, checked her blood pressure, and slid a cuff around her arm. I stood just outside the curtain, my body aching with the need to be inside, but a nurse blocked me gently. "She needs calm," she said.
Medical emergency. Relief flooded me so suddenly that I nearly collapsed against the wall. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I whispered a thank you to God. But Dr. Hayes' eyes did not soften. Instead, he lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder as if the walls might be listening. "During the tests we ran, something else came up, something we need to discuss." My breath caught. "Something else?" He nodded gravely. "As part of the emergency protocol, we conducted a series of blood tests, on Emily and on the baby. They revealed something unusual. A genetic marker that didn't match what we expected." The words rang in my ears like the toll of a funeral bell. I gripped the edge of the plastic chair behind me to keep from sinking to the floor. "What do you mean by unusual?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the curtained room where Emily lay. "I mean the same anomaly we saw in the original DNA results. The maternal line is intact. You are unquestionably her mother. But the paternal markers don't align. Not with the man listed in her records, and not with the man sitting by her bedside now." The world tilted. My knees gave out and I dropped into the chair, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. Jason.
He wasn't just passive, silent, complicit. He didn't fit at all. I remembered the way he hadn't defended me at the baby shower, the way he had kept glancing at his phone, the way his mother had smirked as if she already knew the ending to a story the rest of us were still trying to read. My skin went cold, my mouth dry, as the puzzle pieces I had ignored for years snapped together with cruel clarity. The curtain swished open and Emily's tear-streaked face appeared. She was sitting up now, her color returning, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Jason hovered beside her, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear, but his eyes darted nervously, unable to meet hers. "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice trembling but urgent. "Mom, Dr. Hayes, what's going on? You're both looking at me like the world just ended." Dr. Hayes stepped closer, his tone calm but firm. "Emily, you and the baby are safe, but there's a genetic inconsistency we need to address. It concerns paternity." The room stilled. Jason flinched, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Emily's eyes widened, trembling with rage. "Jason," she whispered, her tears spilling anew. "What is he talking about? Why doesn't this match? Why are there questions about you?" Jason's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to the floor, then to his mother, who had slipped quietly into the hallway, her face pale but her eyes sharp with unspoken warning. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, his silence louder than any confession. Emily's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "Tell me the truth! Don't you dare sit there and say nothing! Not now, not when everything is falling apart." She pushed herself upright, ignoring the nurse's warning hand on her shoulder. Her body shook, but her rage was stronger than her weakness. "Jason!" she shouted, her voice breaking. "What have you done?" "What are you hiding from me?" Jason lifted his head at last, his lips trembling, his eyes filled with a fear I had never seen before. And as the room held its breath, as Emily demanded answers, as the weight of every secret bore down upon us, the real betrayer was finally unmasked. It wasn't me they should have doubted. It was him. The silence in the hospital room was unbearable, thick with dread, and broken only by the rhythmic beeping of Emily's heart monitor. My daughter's eyes were locked on Jason, wide and glistening with disbelief. Her entire body trembled, though whether from exhaustion or rage I couldn't tell. She had been through enough already, fainting, panic, whispers, DNA tests. But now she stood on the precipice of the most devastating truth of all. Jason's lips moved as if he might speak, but no sound came. His eyes darted helplessly between Emily, me, and the doctor, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. For years, his silence had been his shield. Tonight, that silence became a weapon, one that cut deeper than any words. Emily's voice, hoarse from crying, cracked as she shouted, "Say something, Jason! Tell me what's going on. Tell me the truth." Jason's hands trembled as he finally whispered, "Emily, I never meant for it to come out this way." The words shattered the air like glass. Emily's face contorted with shock, then fury. "So it's true?" she cried. "The tests, the whispers, everything? You lied to me?" Jason, her signature composure, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Emily," she said smoothly, "you must understand. Families handle things in their own way. We were only trying to shield you from unnecessary pain. Jason made a mistake, yes, but shield me?" Emily cut her off, her voice trembling with fury. "You destroyed me. You let me question the woman who gave me everything, who raised me alone when my so-called father abandoned me. You stood there and watched me doubt her, watched me accuse her, all while protecting him. You've done nothing but poison this family." Robert's jaw tightened, his booming voice rising above the chaos. "Enough! You're being hysterical. This is not the time to tear Jason apart when you should be standing by your husband. Mistakes happen. We need to focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past." The words made me want to scream. Mistakes? He called betrayal, deception, fatherhood in question a mistake? My chest ached with fury, but Emily beat me to the response. "No," she said, her voice sharp and certain, cutting through the noise like a blade. "You don't get to decide what matters to me.
You don't get to tell me to move on from lies that define my child's very existence. This isn't about a mistake. This is about betrayal, and it's about all of you." Her words sliced through Linda and Robert's polished armor, leaving their faces momentarily exposed. Fear in Robert's eyes, calculation in Linda's. I stepped closer, my hand hovering protectively near Emily's shoulder. My voice shook, but it carried years of buried strength. "You all wanted me to be the villain. You wanted me to carry the shame so your son could walk free. You whispered, you mocked, you questioned whether I was even a mother. But look around. The truth was never mine to hide. It was his." The crowd, once divided, now shifted entirely. Guests who had avoided my gaze earlier now looked at me with sympathy, even guilt. A few glared openly at Jason, at Linda, at Robert. The tide had turned. I was no longer the accused. I was the vindicated. Jason collapsed into the chair beside the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to fix it once it started. I thought I could make it right somehow, but I was in the doorway, like a judge returning to deliver a verdict." His face was solemn, his hands steady as he held the envelope aloft, though the weight of it seemed to bend the very air in the room. I could feel every pair of eyes fix on him, the silence pressing in so tightly that even the heart monitor's rhythmic beeps felt deafening. Emily clutched the sheets of her hospital bed, her knuckles pale, her eyes wide and shimmering with dread. Jason sat slumped in the chair beside her, his shoulders hunched, his eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. Linda and Robert stood stiff near the foot of the bed, their polished composure faltering, their masks beginning to crack under the pressure of truth they could no longer control. Dr. Hayes stepped inside, closed the door softly behind him, and cleared his throat. "This," he said, holding the envelope a little higher, "is the result of a secondary test. It was run to confirm the irregularities we found earlier, and to eliminate any doubt about where the truth lies." The words hung heavy in the sterile air. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands gripping the edge of the chair so tightly I thought the plastic might snap. For 30 years, I had carried every battle scar of motherhood in silence. Tonight, those scars were being weighed against the paper in his hand. Emily's voice trembled. "Please," she whispered, "tell me. I can't live in this limbo anymore." Dr. Hayes nodded, his expression softening, and slowly, carefully, he tore open the envelope. The sound of paper ripping was louder than any scream. He unfolded the sheet, scanned it with deliberate care, and then lifted his eyes. "These results confirm without question," he said, his tone calm but unyielding, "that Maggie Turner is Emily Miller's biological mother. There is no doubt. There never was." The breath I had been holding for hours escaped me in a sob, my body collapsing forward as tears streamed freely down my face. Relief crashed over me like a tidal wave, powerful and overwhelming. She was mine. She had always been mine. No whisper, no rumor, no manipulation could take that away. Emily's own tears spilled as she let out a sob that sounded like both grief and release.
Sharpening. The same test also confirmed the other anomaly. The child Emily is carrying does not share paternal markers with Jason Miller. Gasps erupted across the room. Emily stiffened in my arms, her body trembling violently. She pulled back just enough to look at Jason, her eyes wide, her face pale as paper. "What?" she whispered, her voice raw and breaking. "What did he just say?" Jason's face crumpled, his head falling into his hands as sobs racked his body. "I'm sorry," he muttered over and over, his words muffled and broken. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want you to find out like this." Emily's voice rose, sharp and agonized. "You betrayed me, Jason. You betrayed me and our baby." She shoved at him with weak but furious hands, tears streaming down her face. "And you let them," she pointed at Linda and Robert, "you let them stand there and accuse my mother, humiliate her, tear her apart, when all along it was you." The room boiled with murmurs and outrage. Some guests gasped, others cursed under their breath, and a few shook their heads in disgust. Jason wept, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Linda, always the performer, tried to recover, her voice smooth but trembling. Emily, darling, you have to understand. Families protect one another. We were only trying to contain this quietly for your sake. For my sake? Emily's voice cracked like thunder. You destroyed me. You made me question my own mother, the only person who has ever truly loved me. You stood there while I doubted her, while I cried, while she begged me to believe her, and you said nothing. You are monsters, all of you. Robert's face reddened, his voice booming. We did what needed to be done. A scandal like this could ruin Jason's career, our family's name. We were protecting everything we built. Emily's fury burned brighter than his thunder. What about me? She screamed. What about my baby? What about the family you claim to value? All you cared about was your reputation. Well, now everyone knows the truth, and the only family I care about is sitting right beside me, my mother.
Shame. The room was silent, the verdict delivered. But justice wasn't over yet. When truth arrives, consequences follow. The room had turned into a tribunal. There was no jury, no gavel, no judge's bench, but the verdict was clear, and the punishment was already being written in the whispers, the stares, the silence that followed every revelation. For hours, I had been the one on trial, my motherhood dissected, my identity mocked, my soul stripped bare in front of family and strangers alike. But now the tables had turned, and the spotlight, blinding, merciless, burned down on the Millers. Linda's face, once a mask of polished control, was fractured. Her lips trembled as she tried to summon the same commanding composure she had worn at the baby shower, but no one was listening anymore. Robert stood stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the floor as though searching for an escape hatch. Jason sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, his body broken, not just by guilt, but by the realization that everyone knew who he truly was. The guests, once divided, now leaned heavily against them. Unbelievable, someone muttered. All this time. Another shook her head, whispering, and they made us think Maggie was the liar. Apologies began trickling toward me, hesitant at first, then stronger. People approaching my chair to say words like, I'm sorry, we were wrong, you didn't deserve this. Each one felt like a balm, though I didn't crave their validation. I hadn't fought for their approval. I had fought for Emily, for truth, for the dignity of motherhood itself. Jason finally lifted his head, his face blotched and streaked with tears. Emily, please, he begged, his voice hoarse, broken. I love you. I made a mistake, but I can fix it. I can be better. We can still have our family. Emily's eyes hardened, her tears drying into something sharper. She sat taller on the hospital bed, her hand clutching mine. A mistake? She repeated, her voice trembling but clear. Cheating on me. Lying to me. Letting your parents humiliate my mother. Letting me question the one person who has never betrayed me. That wasn't a mistake, Jason. That was a choice. 1,000 choices you made every single day. Jason shook his head violently.
Through betrayal. You think you are the first woman whose husband strayed? You endure. You forgive. That's what strong families do. I rose to my feet then, my voice strong and steady. No, Robert. That's what broken families do. Strong families protect each other. Strong families tell the truth. Strong families don't sacrifice their daughters for the sake of appearances. The guests erupted in agreement, voices overlapping, affirmations echoing through the sterile hospital air. For the first time that night, I felt a strange calm wash over me, not relief, not victory, but a steady strength that came from finally being able to speak without fear. I turned to face the room, my voice carrying with quiet authority. I was a single mother for 30 years. I worked double shifts. I went without food. I sold my own comfort for the sake of my child. And not once did I complain. Not once did I let her feel less than she was. Tonight, I was humiliated.
I was accused of not being a mother. And all of you heard those whispers. Some of you believed them. But motherhood isn't proven by DNA alone. It's proven by every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every act of love. And I will never again let anyone reduce me to anything less. The room fell silent, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. Eyes glistened with tears. Heads nodded. Even those who had once sided with Linda lowered their gazes in shame. Jason tried again, his voice desperate, his body trembling. Emily, please. We can go to counselling. We can... But Emily cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. You didn't just betray me, Jason. You betrayed my baby. You betrayed my mother. You betrayed every vow you ever made. And I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Jason's face collapsed into despair, his sobs raw and guttural. Linda reached for his shoulder, but he shoved her hand away, burying his face once more. Robert stood silent now, his booming voice silenced, his power crumbling in the face of truth. The guests began to leave one by one, offering me soft words, hugs, apologies. They no longer looked at me as the subject of gossip.
Choice still loomed in the shadows, one only Emily could make. But the hardest decision was yet to come, and it was Emily's to make. The woman they mocked walked out stronger than they could ever imagine. The storm that had raged around us finally began to quiet, though its echoes lingered in the walls of that hospital room long after the Millers left. They departed not with dignity, but in disgrace, their backs stiff, their eyes avoiding every gaze that burned into them. Linda's pearls no longer gleamed. They felt like shackles clinking against her throat. Robert's booming voice had dwindled to silence, a hollow reminder of power built on lies. And Jason, broken and weeping, followed them like a shadow that no longer belonged to the light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Emily and I were alone, or at least alone in spirit. Nurses still moved in and out, monitors still beeped steadily, but the toxic weight of suspicion and betrayal had finally lifted. The air was different. It was ours again. Emily leaned against me in her hospital bed, her hand clutching mine tightly as if afraid I might vanish. Her eyes, swollen from hours of tears, finally softened as she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. For doubting you. For letting their poison in. I should have known better. I should have trusted what you've shown me every day of my life." I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and kissed it gently. "You don't have to apologize to me, Emily. You were manipulated. They preyed on your fear. They wanted to divide us because together we're stronger than they'll ever be. And now you know. Now you'll never let them in again." Her tears spilled fresh, but they weren't the bitter, broken sobs of earlier. They were tears of release, of healing. She rested her head against my shoulder, just as she had as a child when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. "I don't want them near me, Mom," she whispered. "Not Jason, not Linda, not Robert. I don't want their voices anywhere near this baby. I want to raise my child in love, not lies." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it nearly buckled me. For years I had carried the fear that Emily's marriage to Jason bound her to his parents, to their manipulation, to their endless hunger for control. But in that moment, I knew she was have cherished. Linda and Robert sent letters, calls, even emissaries begging for reconciliation. But Emily never wavered. She was done. And then the day came. I stood in a delivery room once again, though this time I wasn't the one on the table. I was the mother waiting just beyond, pacing, praying, holding my breath with every muffled sound I heard from behind the closed door. Hours passed, stretching into what felt like eternity. Every step I took across the sterile tiles was haunted by memories of my own delivery. The panic, the loss of control, the moment I nearly lost Emily before I ever got to know her. And then, at last, the cry. A baby's cry, strong, beautiful, defiant. The sound pierced through every scar I had carried, healing them all at once. Tears blurred my vision as a nurse finally appeared, her smile wide as she beckoned me forward. "Come meet your grandchild,"
she said softly. When I stepped into that room, Emily was glowing, exhausted but radiant, her arms cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Mom, meet your grandson." My knees nearly gave out as I reached for him, my hands trembling as I held him for the first time. His tiny fingers curled around mine. His eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, and I felt the universe shift. 30 years of sacrifice, humiliation, accusation, and doubt dissolved in that instant. I had not only raised my daughter, I had lived long enough to see her bring life into this world. And this child, this perfect, innocent child, was the beginning of something pure, untouched by the lies that had once nearly destroyed us. Emily reached for my hand, her voice breaking as she said, "I want him to grow up knowing the truth, Mum. I want him to know he comes from strength, not weakness, from love, not shame, from you." I kissed her hand, my tears falling onto our intertwined fingers. "He will know," I whispered, "because I will make sure he does." The months that followed were not easy. Emily had to face the legal battles, the social fallout, the endless questions about her marriage. But she never faced them alone. I was with her and emerged, not broken, but transformed. She no longer doubted me. I no longer doubted myself. And together, we had built something stronger than the whispers could ever tear down. So I leave you with this. If your identity was mocked in public, would you have the strength to stand tall until the truth set you free? If you were in Emily's place, would you forgive Jason or walk away forever? Share your thoughts in the comments because your voice is what gives this story its power. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more stories that will stay with you long after they end.